This is Thank You Mama, weekly lessons from mothers all around the world. Hi and welcome to Thank You Mama. My name is Anna Titer. My guest today is Tara Jabbari. Tara's family is from Iran. Tara was born and raised in Chicago. She is currently, as I just found out, a nomad, and she'll tell us what that means. Tara is a digital media producer and a consultant. She is also a host of a new podcast called Who Was She?, which is about women in Bahai history. And we are going to learn from Tara also what Bahai means and is. Tara's first season of her podcast is about Lidia Zamenhof, who was the daughter of Ludwig Zamenhof, the father of Esperanto. Wow, Tara, welcome.
Thank you.
We have so many things to talk about and explain and teach our listeners. First, tell me, what makes you a nomad currently?
Because I have no home base right now. I grew up in Chicago, but I've lived abroad a couple of times. I lived in New Zealand for a year. I studied abroad a couple of times. And then I went to graduate school. And after a few years in Washington, D.C., I decided to go back to living abroad, but I couldn't decide where. So in 2020... I put everything in storage and I packed my bags, and then I was off, and I was using a travel program called Remote Year that helped, put nomads together, and we were going to live in 6 different countries together. But 2 months into the program, COVID hit, and we were forced back into the United States. Or back home. So I went back to my mother in March 2020 after living in Medellin, Colombia, which I loved. And then I was in Mexico City. And currently, because I have no home base, a friend of mine needed someone to kind of cat sit and house sit for her apartment in New York City. And because I have no home base and I work remotely, I said, I'll do it. So I've been here since November. Currently, we're in January, and I'll be here probably another couple of weeks.
Tara, we forgot to mention that you are a half of my experiment, which I wanted to do for quite a while, which is to interview both a mother and a daughter.
Yes, that's right.
But not
You're
at the
same.
same.
Talk to my mom.
Yes. So I'm very excited to see how this goes, to learn through not only 2 generations but 3. 2 episodes, 3 generations. That's exciting.
I'm looking forward to it because my grandmother died when I was 3 months old, so I didn't really ever get to know her. So I'm excited to hear what mom learned from her mom.
Tara, tell me first about Who Was She? I'm excited about your new podcast. Tell me about it.
So my podcast, Who Was She? Currently, it's a biographical podcast, and it was inspired because I learned about Lidia Zamenhof. She was an Esperantist and a Bahai who traveled through 3 continents between 2 world wars. She was a teacher. She taught Esperanto in hopes to bring unity for humankind because language is one of the biggest barriers we have. And her father invented the language Esperanto. And she had an amazing journey. And one that was really fascinating is that there were countless attempts to save her life, but she did end up dying in a concentration camp in World War II. But she met so many different people from all walks of life, and everyone who met her kind of had an amazing story to tell of just how she inspired them. And it's been 6 years in the making, and I was hoping to make a film out of it, and that's really difficult and expensive. But in the last year or so, I decided to do podcasting. I've produced other podcasts. I've worked in film festivals and interviewed filmmakers for their podcasts, independent podcasts too. And I realized it's a very affordable storytelling medium. And so I thought, well, okay, why don't I just do the story through a podcast? So that's the basis of Who Was She? And then I'm hoping to continue it with other powerful stories and I decided to concentrate on women just so it's niche enough but wide enough for me to continue, because I enjoy reading about biographies a lot. But I also studied media, and I always wanted to be a storyteller and things. So it's kind of combining my two passions of learning and sharing.
Tara, but now tell us the big thing. What or who is or are Bahai?
So the Bahai faith is a religion. It's the youngest independent religion, meaning it's not a sect of anything. And it started in the 19th century, present-day Iran or Persia at the time. And the core beliefs are that we're monotheistic. We do believe that there's this creator that is all-knowing, and the English word for it is God. So we believe in God, and we do believe that God created everything. So God also created manifestations or prophets to come down to humanity to teach them so that they are an ever-evolving civilization. We use like the golden rule as an example. Jesus came down and said, be kind to your neighbor. Muhammad came down to say, be kind to your countrymen. And Baha'u'llah, the founder of the Bahai faith, came down to say, be kind to the whole world, because we're all creatures of the same being, God. So there's unity in us. It doesn't matter if you're male or female or black or white or blue, whatever it is. So once we understand that and we accept each other and love each other for that, we can continue to progress. And one of its principles, and it strives to accomplish, is that we believe in the equality between men and women. Mm-hmm. We use the symbol of a bird. A bird can't fly without both wings. Man is one side of the one wing, and a female is the other wing. So that's the visual that comes with it. But also we believe in elimination of all prejudice, and also a universal language, auxiliary language, so that one day all we have to do is learn our mother tongue and this one auxiliary language, and therefore we can all communicate together. Because one of the biggest problems, and it's in, the Old Testament, the Tower of Babel and all that the language barriers keep us from understanding each other and can offer a lot of problems.
But how does that connect? Is it similar to Esperanto? What does that mean?
So Esperanto was an independent, like Lidia Zamenhof was not a Bahai. And he was Jewish, and he was from Lithuania. And he grew up in Poland and saw the Germans and the Polish and the Russians. They would kind of be strife against each other. They didn't understand each other. They didn't want to learn each other's languages. And so he independently said, okay, if we can find a language that we can all speak, but he didn't want to say my language is the better one or your language is the better one. So he invented a whole new language. This is in the early 1900s when and the Bahai faith was growing globally around that time. And they found it. Lidia Zamenhof found out about the Bahai faith. He never became a Bahai. His daughter eventually, Lidia, did become a Bahai because of this. But Baha'u'llah and his followers, he encouraged them to learn this language. It's not saying that it is the auxiliary language, but it's the wholehearted, genuine effort to bring unity through language, which is one of the main core principles of the Bahai faith. Mm-hmm. It's not like it's officially Esperanto or it's officially English. We don't know that yet, and we're less than 200 years old. But it was admirable that he tried it, and that's how Lidia became interested in the Bahai faith, because the Bahai faith definitely was saying we need to learn an auxiliary language, and then a lot more peace will happen and love. Communication. And she was drawn to that. And then she learned a little bit more, because there's more to it than being good at languages to become a Bahai. But that's how it kind of connected the two. But I came from a Baha'i background, and then I learned about Lidia Zamenhof. So it was kind of backwards for me.
Are both of your parents Baha'i?
Yes. So both sides. So you're not born a Baha'i. If you come from a Baha'i household or family, you're not born a Baha'i. At the age of 15, which is the age of maturity, it is up to that 15-year-old to decide, are you a Baha'i or are you something else or whatever it is. And as a family or as a community, that child from birth to 15 and onward is encouraged to be taught all the different religions and philosophies, and it's up to the individual to decide. So, I used to go to church with my friend who's Catholic, and I remember I wouldn't go to confession because I can't, but I would be like, that's so cool. And my mom's like, what do you need to confess about? No, you don't need to, because we don't have a clergy. So she's like, you tell me whatever you need to confess. I'm like, nothing. I just think it's cool. She's like, well, we don't do that. So you just tell your mommy what you want. But, or like I would go with my friend who's Hindu to their holy days and stuff. And at 15, I still didn't quite get it. Just if there was a God, what are the points of these prophets and stuff? And so I continued to investigate. It's a Baha'i term, investigation of the truth. And at age 24, I became a Baha'i because it just, when you grow up in a Baha'i household and you meet other Baha'is who've learned about it, and they don't come from a family background like mine, it was interesting to meet them because they just felt so at peace and just in love with, now I'm comforted. I know something. I have a purpose. Sort of like how Lidia does. Because she grew up in a Jewish household, but not religiously, more culturally. And then she became an atheist, and then she became a Baha'i. And in the podcast, I'll share quotes from her letters of why she became a Baha'i. But I never really had that. It just, when you think of the Baha'i faith, especially if you're raised in it, you're like, well, elimination of all prejudices and all that stuff, that's just being a good person. What does that have to do with God and religion and all that? So, but there is more aspects to it. And then it did happen for me at age 24. I became a Baha'i and have been since. And that is one of the things I do credit my parents, particularly my mother, because what is kind of cool is if your parents who are Baha'is and you at 15 or however old, or if you never want to become a Baha'i, you are never going to be in trouble. If your parents put pressure on you, they are the ones who are in the wrong. And you can let the Baha'i community know, you're like, I am not a Baha'i. My mother and father want me to become a Baha'i, and I feel like they're forcing me to become a Baha'i. Guess who really gets in trouble? It's the parents. And I thought that was really admirable, and just, it makes sense. It's up to the individual, their relationship to spirituality and religion and faith and God. So my dad had a kind of a hard time with it, but my mother never put pressure on me. She always just said, I only ask that you continue to investigate, because these are pretty big questions, and it is a big part of life is how we feel about spirituality and religion. So just don't ignore it.
But Tara,
didn't.
They are big. They are too big for a 15-year-old. I mean,
it is. Yeah. So maybe I know plenty of Baha'is who became a Baha'i at 15 years old or even younger, I guess. I've heard a couple of stories there. And some people have became Baha'is decades later. It's everyone's story is so individual. So it was interesting, but I do credit my mom a lot for never putting that pressure on me, not giving me like a guilt trip that, oh, you're not a Baha'i, all that stuff.
Tara, one last question before we jump to Mama. You've never been to Iran, I remember you saying.
Yes, I have not. Yeah. Inshallah, ye roz mitunam. One day, I hope I can. Persian was still my first language. My mother made sure of that. But one of the reasons is in Iran, which is where the Baha'i faith was founded. During the Iranian Revolution, the clergy, the Islamic Republic of Iran, came into power. And again, the clergy, meaning they have all the power. And when they learned of the Baha'i faith, it comes after Muhammad. So they say that we're heretics, but the other big reason why they have been persecuting Baha'is is because we don't have a clergy. And so they don't want to give away their power, those who are in power right now, which is the clergy. And it was very, very destructive. I'm sure Mom will tell you a little bit more about that, or has told you a little bit about that. But during the Iranian Revolution was the highest murders and kidnappings of Baha'is with absolute no repercussions. We still don't know where some of the bodies are. I have interviewed and shared stories of people whose parents were killed by the clergy and their soldiers, and then were told, if you want your parents' bodies back, you have to pay for the bullets that we used to kill them with. And if you don't, I'll just kill you right here. Like, there was no, my mom's sister, her husband, so my uncle, was a very well-known engineer, and his wife, my aunt, was in the United States 8-9 months pregnant. And he had to go back to Iran during this height of this chaos. And my recollection from hearing it secondhand is that he was forced to stay in the office building, and the army and the clergy were like, we are deciding to put him in prison or to let him go or to keep him in here because he's a Baha'i. And so he would tell my aunt that he had to stay in Iran for work. He didn't want her to worry. And so he's like, I'd rather have her be pissed off that I'll miss our child's birth thinking I'm working than thinking and knowing that I could be killed at any second. Luckily, he was able to go the second they kind of loosened the reins. He grabbed his passport and left Iran and never came back. But there's countless stories of this. Both my parents were studying abroad. My father was in the United States. My mother was in France. And they never were able to come. Well, my father was able to go back to Iran in early 2000s. But my mother has never been back since. She's too afraid. Yeah. I've heard different things. I've known Baha'is who've gone back to Iran with no problems. I've heard that it gets a little dicey. It's sort of like the mood of the guard at the time. And my mom's like, forget it. I'm not risking your life like that. But I hope one day that it will be a lot less strife, that I could go visit. I'd really like to go visit.
Yep. Let's jump to Mom. Now we've learned so much about Baha'is and about Esperanto, and let's talk about Mom Marjan. Will you tell me a little bit about her? Let's just quickly introduce her.
So my mother is Marjan Mashed, and she was born and raised in Iran. She was educated in France and married my father and moved to the United States, which has been her home for the last 30-odd years. She was trained as a classical pianist, and she also was a florist or a floral designer, is what she likes to say. And more recently, since lockdown in 2020, she's an artist, honestly. So with floral design going back, like no one was using flowers. Weddings were canceled, hotels were canceled, all sorts of stuff. So she needed a creative outlet, and she designed jewelry. And so now she's started her own jewelry business. And so that's her next endeavor. Mom is an artist, and I am her only child, and that's my mommy.
What have you learned from her?
Okay. So you asked for like 3 big lessons. And so I was thinking about it, and I was listening to your podcast episodes for inspiration. Like, what did people learn? So should I list them first or go one by one?
Let's go one by one. And it doesn't have to be 3. You can have more.
I know. It's hard. And it's also nerve-wracking because my mother will be on the podcast.
But this is why it's an interesting experiment, what we are doing. Let's see,
exactly.
It's going to be interesting listening to both episodes and see what passes on through generations and what you feel like your mom taught you versus what she feels like she's taught you.
Yeah. Well, okay. So I think that the number one thing that I think of is, to shorten it to a sentence, is my mother always taught me to know your worth. She has a lot of self-confidence. There's a joke on the show Sex and the City that they're like, what does she need therapy for? She's like, she has too much self-confidence. And I was like, Mom, that's you. That's totally you.
Where do you think she got it from? How do you think she got it?
That's why I'm curious to see if it's from my grandmother. I'm not sure because I didn't get to know my grandmother. Mm-hmm. I kind of knew my grandfather, but I think he died when I was 18, but I'm not sure. It's part of her character. I'll give you an example. So when I was a kid, I love stories and I love being a storyteller. But when I was a kid, I thought I'd be an actress. And I remember all these kids in school were like, oh, you're not a good enough actress and stuff like that. And it hurt my feelings. And I went to my mom and she's like, I'm sorry, who are these people? The same people in your grade, the same age as you. They've never acted before. She's like, listen, if Steven Spielberg tells you, by the way, Tara, you're not a good actress, then you go get other lessons. And if that's really what you want to do, like you keep going to what you want to accomplish. Like know your worth. Don't let others make you second guess things. And when there's a will, there's a way kind of attitude that she's had that I've picked up too. So that's one of the big ones that really stand up to me. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So the number one is, I remember I emailed this to you. I was like, when in doubt, dress up. So
I love that. That's so original.
That's me trying to like simplify like how my mother's very much sophisticated. And, when people came over to our house, my mother always had her diamond earrings. She always dressed really well. We always used like our expensive china for dishes. Like if there was a group of us that were 5 or more, we picked up those china dishes. Everything be the best quality, live your best life, all of that stuff. So she's very much into looks and how appearance, not looks, appearance.
Tara, is that very much Iranian? Because I have a feeling from all my Iranian friends, they are always perfectly elegant and behaved, and their houses are beautiful, and they are very much into appearance. Yes, into presenting, into being on your best, like presenting yourself in your best way.
Yeah, I remember a friend of mine who's Iranian. We were living in New Zealand and she was Australian and I was American. So we kind of bonded because we were sort of like the foreigners. And she redid her house. So when we came, I didn't think much of it. But everyone's like, what a lavish house. And it wasn't that big. But what we do is like, we like high ceilings. Mm-hmm. We like a lot of gold or gold colored.
Yes.
And it gives you this idea that it's larger than it is, or more open space than it is, and all that stuff. Like we know how to kind of not manipulate, but to make it bigger and brighter and more welcoming as well. So yeah, I think that's a huge, if we go to a party, we're like, let's wear jeans, like let's wear slacks, black pants are always a good bet, a nice blouse. And if everyone's in a jeans and a t-shirt, okay, that's okay. But if people were like in a dress or something, at least you sort of were dressed for the occasion too. Like don't wear sneakers, find some comfortable but nice boots that could be good for dinner, all that stuff. So that was how she was like always, and it's always just to be on the safe side. You never know. It's kind of like that expression, like, if you were ever, God forbid, in a car accident and then, they have to rip your clothes off and you're like wearing, it was laundry day and you're underwear. Like, oh crap, right? All these old underwear or something, like, she's like, it's not like she's ever used that analogy, but I always think of that and feel like, well, now you're best dressed, you know.
Do you have a feeling that was helpful in your life?
I do. I think it was always, it's better to be overdressed than underdressed in my experience, right? I feel like my mother was always like, be prepared for if the queen comes over. Like, are you okay with how you dressed? Right? But still functioning, right? And if she didn't come over, oh, well, at least you were better safe to be than sorry, you know? So that's, and I do think that's kind of like a Persian thing, but I have seen a little bit too much makeup or, you know, like that. Like my mother was never into that. And her school of thought was like, the point of makeup is to kind of look like you're not wearing makeup. So it's a little bit more simplified, but definitely I'm sure it is kind of like a Persian thing or a Middle Eastern thing is to kind of, you know, wear nice jewelry and nice clothes and always present yourself pleasantly and all that stuff. Yeah, that's definitely. But my mother is the epitome of that.
We Croats are very similar to that.
I think like Latin people are the similar, you know, a lot of cultures are like that.
All the cultures where there's sunshine, I think somehow that's connected. Yeah. When it's raining, you just have to be practical, you know. But if it's warm and sunny, you can always think about how you look.
Yes, exactly. Like,
Tara, will you share the last lesson you sent me?
Yeah, so it kind of goes back to like when in doubt, dress up. My mother, it's about money spending, but also it's about quality, not quantity. When I had to go shopping for shoes or for something, my mother was like, okay, let's go to the best quality. Let's do our research. And I remember for graduation, for college, she's like, I'm going to take you to this Italian store. And I don't remember the name of it, but it was this Italian store in England. We were traveling and it was $400. And she's like, we're going to get it because this will last you for decades. And I still wear those shoes. Like a 22-year-old having $400 pair of shoes. And you know what I mean? But my mom's like, either you buy like 5 different pairs from Target that might not be the best quality and then you can't be in them for very long, or they break more often. You're going to spend more than you think you are. So just get the best quality, but know that that it'll last you forever. That the China, that was one of those things that she taught me. So when I went for packing for my nomad life, I was looking for the best suitcase, all that stuff, looking at reviews, and I found really good luggage that will last me for decades to come, but it's not like the $30 things that you can kind of find anywhere. Like you need to have the best quality.
But isn't that super, super important today with our growing, hopefully, environmental consciousness?
Yeah.
And I just read somewhere that apparently people wear clothes they buy on average 7 times. Like this consuming culture where we buy and things are cheap and we buy en masse and either we don't like it anymore or it breaks down and it all lands in the oceans. Yeah. I'm also becoming more and more aware. I was thinking about it, how maybe it's growing older and you don't need that urge of let's shop and let me look different, but and more like I'm going to buy this that? And it's going to, exactly, who makes it and under which circumstances they make it.
Exactly. Like any of these bigger chains that are for cheap, they were made in sweat lodges with children, most likely, you know, like being aware of that. Now, my mother's not educated in that capacity, but I do know a lot of people who are, and they taught me where to look for. And because of the internet, we have better resources to educate ourselves, but it is definitely a thing of, you know, basically get the best, but not excessively. Quality of life, not quantity.
I love that. It's such an important lesson to save our planet.
Yeah, exactly.
I wish I learned it earlier. I had friends who were like, no, buy a better and more expensive thing, but then buy one. And I was like, no, I'll go to H&M and buy 7 of these.
I'm still learning too. Yeah. I'm still learning.
Tara, was there anything she was not able to teach you? Anything that you find important that you had to learn yourself?
Yeah, I don't think this is like necessarily her fault. I kind of wish that she was able to teach me more about finding confidence in yourself. I think it's just so innately in part of her nature. She wasn't sure how to teach that necessarily.
Oh, that's interesting. That's so interesting that she is confident, but she didn't teach you how to become it.
She definitely has a tough love approach, which I kind of have too. She didn't coddle me, like, oh, maybe. She's like, no, that was stupid what you did. Kind of thing. But because my father was a very wise person. Everyone I knew who knew him said he was one of the smartest men we've ever met. And through my father, he was a banker. So my mother learned finances through him. He taught me a lot about finances. I got my first credit card, or I think I was 13 or 14. And my mother's like, isn't that too young? He's like, she needs to know the value of $1, but she has to pay that credit card bill. And it wasn't a debit card. It was a credit card, which was really hard because it's not like,
yes,
I'm proud to say I've never been late for a credit card bill, to pay my credit card bill, or if I knew I didn't have the money, I didn't buy it. Like, I still don't understand how people do that. But that was, my dad kind of taught us that way, or he was so educated in that field. So I learned a lot about finances through him and through my mother, who built businesses during recession and all that stuff. She's very money conscious too. But my father also suffered a lot with low self-esteem. He kind of downplayed his achievements. And then I always say my mother had too much self-confidence and my father had too little self-confidence. So it was kind of hard that when I built up, when people gave me compliments about my work or even how I look or something, I didn't really know how to take it. I still am struggling with it. Because my mother was like, I know, thank you. Kind of thing. And my father was more like, oh, it's okay. So I kind of have this weird limbo, and I'm trying to learn how to own it, but not let it go to my head. My mother doesn't let it go to her head. She just knows herself so well. So when they said, that's such beautiful design, she's like, thank you. But she doesn't, she's like, I know, like, some people might not think it's beautiful. I think it's beautiful. I'm glad you like it, kind of thing. But how do you kind of have that confidence so that when there are critics, that you don't take it too hard? Because I feel like my father was more like that. He kind of dwelled in the negative, and I'm trying not to. And my mother, for the most part, doesn't dwell on the negative. And I wish I could learn a little bit from that. I don't know. But I don't know how she would be able to teach me that. So yeah.
That's fascinating. Tara, thank you so much.
Thank you, Anna. I'm so glad we got in touch. And I hope this experiment proves quite interesting for your listeners too.
Yes. And thank you for teaching us so much about Esperanto and the Bahai and Iran and your mom. And I found it very, very interesting, and sharing her lessons.
I am so glad. Thank you so much.
If you enjoy Thank You Mama and want to help it grow, please take the 2 seconds to leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. It really helps. If you'd like to get in touch, you can send me a mail at info@thankyoumama.net. You can also find me on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter under Anna Teider, that's Tajder. This was Thank You Mama. Come back next week, subscribe, and tell your friends.